back to Ask Angelina, but before we get into today's episode, I want to remind you that if you like my podcast, please follow, rate, and share it with your friends and family. If you haven't seen the news lately, in the U.S., there was an off-year election on November 4th this past Tuesday. For those that do not know what an off-year election is, this type of election is held on an odd year that is not a presidential or a congressional election. So what's so special about this off-year election is that, well, it was anything but off. I'll be covering California's Proposition 50, which was passed with roughly 64% of people voting yes to redistrict the state, and I'll explain the importance of this later. I'll also talk about redistricting showdown in Texas, as well as New York's mayor election. But before I want to dive deeper, we need to understand why this election was so important. Okay, so imagine the U.S. as playing team sports. The Republicans are on one side and the Democrats are on another. And it's just as intense and strategic as European soccer leagues. Each team plays different moves to try to gain power over another to ultimately win. But here's a twist. In politics, people don't always play by the rules. And no one said that winning could not be through redrawing them altogether. And this is where redistricting comes in. Redistricting is a process where politicians redraw the boundaries of different districts, basically deciding who votes where, and this could help one side win. The people who live in these districts would vote for who gets to represent their own state. Here's how it works. Every 10 years, the U.S. conducts a census, where they count the total population for each state across the U.S. After the census is conducted, there's a process called apportionment, where there is a new portion of seats that are going to change the number of representatives each state gets, because the House of Reps in Congress is based on their population. Going back to the team sports metaphor, think of apportionment as how many players does each team get to play on the field. Okay, so when a state gains or loses a seat due to these population changes, they need to redistrict. And like I said earlier, it is to redraw the boundaries to match the new number of districts. Each district gets one representative that goes to Washington, D.C. to represent their state and their community. And this is all overseen by a state legislator. But in theory, this is supposed to ensure the fair representation of redrawing the districts by their borders. But it can often become taken advantage of because the state legislator can draw and manipulate the lines in a way that benefits their own party and acts as a cheat code for their side. And when this happens and boundaries are manipulated and redrawn to favor one side, this is called gerrymandering. Since you're listening, go search up gerrymandering district lines, and you will see this weird snake-like outlines that the state legislators draw up that include or exclude specific communities based off their voting patterns. However, it's not allowed to gerrymander based on race, as it's deemed unconstitutional and held at a higher standard in the Supreme Court as of 2025. Although race is not used in gerrymandering, the issue with this process is that it allows politicians to choose their voters, instead of the voters getting to choose who represents them. And this undermines the people's democratic voting power. When politicians manipulate boundaries, it almost guarantees victory for one side, making elections less competitive and more polarized. As a result, in different districts, Republicans end up running against Republicans, and Democrats against Democrats. This pushes candidates to use more left or right-leaning language within their own parties and against each other, which creates a greater bipartisan divide and polarization within Congress. Some may argue, well, we're trying to get like-minded people to represent us and our beliefs. But if those new people are chosen through manipulated maps, it works against the very idea of democracy, where every vote should matter and different perspectives should have a fair chance to be heard by everyone. And this brings us back to the reason why this off-year election on November 4th mattered so much to the people. In California, voters were deciding to pass or reject Proposition 50, whether or not to allow their elected politician to temporarily have the power to redraw congressional lines, essentially taking back that power from an independent state legislator. Before Prop 50, in Texas, the Republicans have been pushing an aggressive agenda, redistricting the map to gain 5 new seats. But California's Prop 50 was a direct combat against their move. Since Prop 50 passed on November 4th, California Democrats were projected to gain 3 to 5 potential seats in Congress, flipping the districts in California that were leaning Republican. This gives Democrats a stronger position for the next election cycle, as they have been under fire for weakly handling the ongoing government shutdown. California's unique democratic mechanisms allow propositions like Prop 50 to occur in the first place. There are 3 major direct democracy mechanisms that give citizens power in California. The first one is through an initiative, where voters can adopt a change in law that must be voted for. The second way is a referendum, where voters can disapprove a law that's passed by the legislative. And lastly, the third way is a recall, where they can remove an elected official from office. These mechanisms vary between states, but it serves as a check to keep democracy closer to the people. In the case of November 4th's election, Californians used the system to make a big statement with Proposition 50 that could greatly impact American politics for years. Now moving across the U.S. from the west to the east, New York City had a big election to decide who would become the new mayor, and the people chose Zoran Mandani, a younger Democratic socialist who is a state assemblyman and now the first Muslim mayor of New York. The other 2 candidates were Andrew Cuomo, New York City's former governor, and Republican Curtis Silva. It was a surprise to some that Zoran Mandani won the election, but let's look deeper into how he was voted into power in the first place. New York's election uses a ranked choice voting system, where instead of a usual winner-take-all scenario, voters have to rank the candidates based off their preference, so in first place, second place, third, and so on. If no one wins a majority in the first round, then the last place candidate with the least amount of votes is eliminated, and then their votes are redistributed to the voter's second choice, and so on. The winning candidate needs to secure over 50% of votes, which means that the candidate has to be supported by the majority of voters in New York. This ranked choice voting system reduces a bipartisanship divide and extreme polarization from the candidates and favors candidates that are more in the middle of the political spectrum. And this is how Zoran Mandani's campaign won, and how he connected with the people of New York, filtered so many diverse voters. Looking at California's Prop 50 against Texas's redistricting agenda, and now New York City's election for mayor, this off-year election shows how voters are quietly reshaping democracy and redefining American politics in their own way. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned something new about current American politics. Don't forget to follow, rate, and share this podcast with your friends and family. Goodbye!